A queen sits in her bedchamber, and she's smiling. Not the polite smile you give visiting nobles. Not the rehearsed expression for portrait painters. This is genuine contentment, the kind that comes from finally getting what you deserve. In her lap sits a golden bowl, and inside that bowl, something that used to be her husband's favorite concubine. Well, parts of her anyway. The tongue specifically, pickled in wine and honey, garnished with crushed pearls, because even revenge deserves presentation. This is Empress Wu Zixin of Tang Dynasty, China, and she is about to teach every woman in her court an important lesson about what happens when you threaten her position. But here's what makes your skin crawl. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a moment of passionate violence. She'd been planning this meal for 6 months, perfecting the recipe, testing preservation methods on smaller subjects, making sure the texture would be just right. Because in the Tang court, punishment wasn't about ending someone quickly. It was about transforming them into a warning that people would whisper about for generations. And Wu Zixin understood something that most rulers miss. The human body contains exactly enough parts to send a very detailed message. The concubine's name was Lady Zhao, and her mistake was simple. She'd smiled at the wrong moment during an imperial banquet. Not at the emperor, just near him. Close enough that Wu noticed the way he glanced back. That single glance cost Lady Zhao everything, but not immediately. Wu was patient. She waited until the girl's guard was down, until she'd forgotten that moment entirely. Then came the invitation to private tea, just 2 women sharing conversation. Lady Zhao arrived wearing her finest silks, probably thinking this was reconciliation, maybe even friendship. The tea was excellent, the conversation polite, and the paralyzing poison in the cup took effect right as Lady Zhao realized she couldn't scream. What followed was documented by court physicians who were required to keep detailed records of imperial activities, even the ones that made them vomit into silk handkerchiefs afterward. Wu had ordered the girl kept alive but immobile, not out of mercy, out of practicality. Dead flesh spoils too quickly. She needed the concubine conscious for what came next. The tongue was removed first, carefully, almost surgically. Palace physicians performed the extraction, using techniques normally reserved for treating throat diseases. They cauterized as they cut, keeping blood loss minimal. Lady Zhao's eyes stayed open the entire time, watching her own flesh deposited into that golden bowl. But Wu wasn't finished. The hands came next. All 10 fingers removed at the first knuckle. Not hacked off, precisely severed with instruments, sharp enough that the cuts were clean. These were pickled separately in smaller jars, each one labeled with a different court lady's name. Gifts, you see. Reminders. The feet received similar treatment. Toes removed, preserved, distributed. By the time Wu's attendants finished, Lady Zhao resembled something between a living corpse and an architectural model of human limitation. No hands to write appeals. No tongue to speak accusations. No feet to walk away. Just eyes that could still see, and a mind that could still understand exactly how thoroughly she deep and erased. The grotesque brilliance of Wu's method wasn't the physical torture. Other rulers had done worse in terms of pure pain. It was the distribution system. Those pickled fingers arrived at noble houses throughout the capital, wrapped in silk, accompanied by handwritten notes from the Empress herself. A token of my regard. Display it prominently. Can you imagine being a court lady, opening that package, seeing your name on the jar label, understanding instantly that this could have been your finger? This was you if you made Wu's list. The jars became furniture in homes across Chang'an. Conversation pieces in the most literal, horrifying sense. Guests would visit, and there on the mantelpiece, next to the incense burner and the poetry scrolls, a severed finger floating in preserving fluid. Nobody threw them away. That would be insulting the Empress. Nobody hid them. That would suggest guilt. So they stayed visible, these tiny monuments to imperial displeasure, decomposing slowly in their expensive containers. But Lady Zhao herself lived. That's what really makes this story burrow under your skin. Wu kept her alive in a special chamber beneath the palace. Not a dungeon, something worse. A display room. Court officials who needed reminding of their place would be brought down to see her. There she'd be, propped in a corner, limbless, tongueless, fed through a tube, eyes still tracking movement. Still aware. The visits became a standard punishment for minor infractions. Spoke out of turn at council? Go spend an hour with Lady Zhao. Complained about imperial policy? Here's your meditation chamber. And the thing is, this system worked. Wu Zixin ruled for decades, the only woman to ever claim the imperial throne in her own name. She outlived 3 emperors, crushed 17 rebellions, and died peacefully in her 80s. Lady Zhao lived for 13 years in that chamber before infection finally finished what Wu had started. 13 years of being a living, breathing, permanent threat. Because Wu understood something about power that most rulers never grasp. You don't maintain control by killing your enemies. You maintain it by keeping them alive just enough to prove you could kill them anytime you wanted. But you're choosing not to. Yet, let's talk about King John of England, and specifically what he did to keep his castle wells clean. Not the King John from the Robin Hood stories, though same person. The real one was somehow worse because he was methodical. See, medieval castles had a sanitation problem. Hundreds of people living in close quarters, limited water sources, and John had this obsessive fear about well poisoning. Reasonable concern, actually. Enemies did poison wells. But John's solution wasn't filtering systems or guards. It was human testing, and he'd refined it into what palace documents called the tasting protocol. Every morning, before anyone else drank, a prisoner from the dungeon would be brought up, forced to consume exactly 1 gallon of well water, then locked in an observation cell. If they were still alive and functional after 6 hours, the well was declared safe. If they died, well, that's what prisoners were for. But here's where it gets properly disturbing. John started noticing patterns. Some prisoners lasted days on tainted water. Others died within hours. So being John, he started experimenting. He deliberately introduced contaminants into wells, different types, different concentrations. Rotting meat 1 week, human waste another. Mercury compounds, arsenic solutions. Then he'd document how long it took for the test subjects to show symptoms. What started as security protocol became the medieval equivalent of clinical trials, except the subjects were starving prisoners, and the Institutional Review Board was one increasingly unhinged king with unlimited power and a note-taking habit. Palace records from 1211 show itemized lists. Subject 47, 3 days post-exposure to bovine decay matter, exhibits tremors and bloody flux. Subject 48, immediate rejection response to metallic compound, deceased within 2 hours. John was building a database of poisoning symptoms, and he was doing it by systematically poisoning people. The observation cells were worse than the dungeons. At least in the dungeon, you knew your status. In observation, he'd been marked for scientific curiosity. Guards would check on you every hour, recording symptoms, vomiting, noted, seizures, documented, begging for death. That's just the disease talking. Hold still for measurement. Some prisoners lasted weeks in observation, their bodies slowly shutting down, while scribes detailed every stage of decay. And John would visit, not to gloat, to study. He'd bring physicians, point out interesting symptom progressions, discuss treatment possibilities, not to help the prisoner, but to understand antidotes for himself if someone ever actually managed to poison his water. The prisoners became living textbooks, their suffering converted into data points in John's expanding knowledge of toxicology. But the truly sick part? This actually made his castle safer. By the time John died in 1216, possibly from dysentery, which is grimly appropriate, he'd created the most comprehensive understanding of water contamination in medieval Europe. His protocols, stripped of the human experimentation parts, got adopted by other castles. His symptom documentation helped physicians identify poisoning cases. His obsessive record-keeping accidentally advanced medical knowledge. Evil has this way of occasionally producing useful byproducts, which somehow makes it worse. You want to condemn it purely, but then you're forced to acknowledge that John's torture dungeon science probably saved lives downstream. Not the lives he destroyed, obviously, but others, strangers, people who benefited from knowledge purchased with prisoner suffering. The observation cells outlasted John's reign. His son Henry III kept the system running, though he added what he considered a humanitarian improvement. Prisoners could volunteer for observation duty in exchange for reduced sentences. Volunteer, as if choosing between rotting in a dungeon forever versus possibly dying from experimental poisoning in 6 months counts as voluntary choice. But men took the offer, because humans will accept almost any horror if you frame it as slightly better than their current horror. And Henry's scribes kept recording. More data, more symptoms, more careful documentation of how human bodies fail under specific stresses. By 1230, English castles possessed the most advanced understanding of water safety in Europe, built on a foundation of methodically poisoned prisoners. And nobody talked about it. Not officially. Court records list the observation program under routine security measures. Expense accounts show payments to scribes and physicians. But the actual details, what happened in those cells, that stayed quietly buried in archives that most historians politely avoided. Because what do you do with that information? How do you process the fact that legitimate medical advances came from deliberate human experimentation that makes modern ethics boards break out in hives? You can't celebrate the knowledge without acknowledging its source. You can't condemn the source without admitting the knowledge proved useful. So it just sits there in historical record, documented and ignored, like so many uncomfortable truths about how progress actually happens. The observation cells were finally demolished in 1255, not for moral reasons. They'd simply become redundant. Enough data had been collected, enough patterns established. Future poisoning attempts could be identified from symptom presentation without needing live test subjects. The prisoners who'd survived observation were released, though calling it release seems generous. Most died within months from organ damage. A few lived longer, carrying scars both visible and internal, walking evidence of what kings consider acceptable costs. And the wells kept flowing. Clean, safe, tested water, purchased at a price nobody wanted to calculate. Because that's the thing about history's darkest corners. Sometimes the monsters accomplished their goals. Sometimes the torture worked. Sometimes the nightmare produced results. And we're left trying to figure out what that says about progress, about civilization, about the distance between laboratory and dungeon when nobody's watching. King John died hated, buried without ceremony, remembered as England's worst king, but his wells stayed clean. And somewhere in that contradiction lies a truth more disturbing than any single torture method. That evil, methodical and documented, can generate lasting benefits. And we have to live with that knowledge, the way John's prisoners lived with poisoned water, until their bodies couldn't anymore.